start. MTC. Unit 06 No Analysis. Some beginning researchers mistakenly believe that a good hypothesis is one that is guaranteed to be right, e.g., alcohol will slow down reaction time. However, if we already know your hypothesis is true before you test it, testing your hypothesis won't tell us anything new. Remember, research is supposed to produce new knowledge. To get new knowledge, you, as a researcher-explorer, need to leave the safety of the shore, established facts, and venture into uncharted waters. As Einstein said, if we knew what we were doing, it would not be called research, would it? If your predictions about what will happen in these uncharted waters are wrong, that's okay. Scientists are allowed to make mistakes. As Bates said, research is the process of going up alleys to see if they are blind. Bates. Indeed, scientists often learn more from predictions that do not turn out than from those that do. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06 No 01. Before the fancy high-rises, financial headquarters, tourist centers, and souvenir peddlers made their way to Battery Park City, the area behind the World Trade Center was a giant, gross landfill. Battery Park City. In 1982, artist Agnes Deans decided to return that landfill back to its roots, although temporarily. 1982, Agnes Deans. Deans was commissioned by the Public Art Fund to create one of the most significant and fantastical pieces of public work Manhattan has ever seen. Deans Public Art Fund Manhattan. Her concept was not a traditional sculpture, but a living installation that changed the way the public looked at art. In the name of art, Deans put a beautiful golden wheat field right in the shadow of the gleaming Twin Towers. Deans. For Wheatfield A confrontation, Deans and volunteers removed trash from 4 acres of land, then planted amber waves of grain atop the area. Wheatfield A confrontation, Deans 4. After months of farming and irrigation, the wheat field was thriving and ready. The artist and her volunteers harvested thousands of pounds of wheat to give to food banks in the city, nourishing both the minds and bodies of New Yorkers. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06 No 02. News reporters are taught to start their stories with the most important information. The first sentence, called the lead, contains the most essential elements of the story. A good lead can convey a lot of information. After the lead, information is presented in decreasing order of importance. Journalists call this the inverted pyramid structure. The most important information, the widest part of the pyramid, is at the top. The inverted pyramid is great for readers. No matter what the reader's attention span, whether she reads only the lead or the entire story, the inverted pyramid maximizes the information she gets. Think of the alternative. If news stories were written like mysteries with a dramatic payoff at the end, then readers who broke off in mid-story would miss the point. Imagine waiting until the last sentence of a story to find out who won the presidential election or the Super Bowl. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06 No 03. In government, in law, in culture, and in routine everyday interaction beyond family and immediate neighbors, a widely understood and clearly formulated language is a great aid to mutual confidence. When dealing with property, with contracts, or even just with the routine exchange of goods and services, concepts and descriptions need to be as precise and unambiguous as possible, otherwise misunderstandings will arise. If full communication with a potential counterparty in a deal is not possible, then uncertainty and probably a measure of distrust will remain. As economic life became more complex in the later Middle Ages, the need for fuller and more precise communication was accentuated. A shared language facilitated clarification and possibly settlement of any disputes. In international trade also the use of a precise and well-formulated language aided the process of translation. The Silk Road could only function at all because translators were always available at interchange points. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06004. Since the early 1980s, Black Friday has been a kind of unofficial U.S. holiday marking the beginning of the holiday season and, consequently, the most profitable time for retailers in the year. 1980. But in recent years, a new movement has come to light, adding a more ecological philosophy. The movement is called Green Friday, and it seeks to raise awareness about the damage that Black Friday brings to the environment. Think of the carbon emissions caused by driving to the mall, the shipping of millions of items around the world, the plastic waste produced by packaging, and even the long-term waste produced by mindlessly buying things we don't need. Green Friday is about changing the way we see this day and switching our mindset from buy to finding alternative ways to give gifts during the holiday season so we don't cause further damage to the earth. Even if only a small percentage of the population makes the switch, it'll mean great things for the environment. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06005. Many inventions were invented thousands of years ago, so it can be difficult to know their exact origins. Sometimes scientists discover a model of an early invention, and from this model they can accurately tell us how old it is and where it came from. However, there is always the possibility that in the future other scientists will discover an even older model of the same invention in a different part of the world. In fact, we are forever discovering the history of ancient inventions. An example of this is the invention of pottery. For many years archaeologists believed that pottery was first invented in the Near East, around modern Iran, where they had found pots dating back to 9000 BC. 9,000. In the 1960s, however, older pots from 10,000 BC were found on Honshu Island, Japan. 1960-10,000. There is always a possibility that in the future archaeologists will find even older pots somewhere else. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06006. If a food contains more sugar than any other ingredient, government regulations require that sugar be listed first on the label. But if a food contains several different kinds of sweeteners, they can be listed separately, which pushes each one farther down the list. This requirement has led the food industry to put in 3 different sources of sugar so that they don't have to say the food has that much sugar. So sugar doesn't appear first. Whatever the true motive, ingredient labeling still does not fully convey the amount of sugar being added to food, certainly not in a language that's easy for consumers to understand. A world-famous cereal brand's label, for example, indicates that the cereal has 11 grams of sugar per serving. 111 g. But nowhere does it tell consumers that more than 1/3 of the box contains added sugar. 31. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06007. There has been a general belief that sport is a way of reducing violence. Anthropologist Richard Sipes tests this notion in a classic study of the relationship between sport and violence. Richard Sipes. Focusing on what he calls combative sports, those sports including actual body contact between opponents or simulated warfare, he hypothesizes that if sport is an alternative to violence, then one would expect to find an inverse correlation between the popularity of combative sports and the frequency and intensity of warfare. In other words, the more combative sports, e.g., football, boxing, the less likely warfare. Using the Human Relations Area files and a sample of 20 societies, Sipes tests the hypothesis and discovers a significant relationship between combative sports and violence, but a direct one, not the inverse correlation of his hypothesis. Human Relations Area Files 20 Sipes. According to Sipes' analysis, the more pervasive and popular combative sports are in a society, the more likely that society is to engage in war. Sipes. So, SIPES draws the obvious conclusion that combative sports are not alternatives to war but rather are reflections of the same aggressive impulses in human society. SIPES. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06008. The earliest challenges and contests to solve important problems in mathematics date back to the 16th and 17th centuries. 1617. Some of these problems have continued to challenge mathematicians until modern times. For example, Pierre de Fermat issued a set of mathematical challenges in 1657, many on prime numbers and divisibility. Pierre de Fermat 1657. The solution to what is now known as Fermat's last theorem was not established until the late 1990s by Andrew Wiles. Fermat's last theorem 1990. Andrew Wiles. David Hilbert, a German mathematician, identified 23 unsolved problems in 1900 with the hope that these problems would be solved in the 21st century. David Hilbert 211900023. Although some of the problems were solved, others remain unsolved to this day. More recently, in 2000, the Clay Mathematics Institute named 7 mathematical problems that had not been solved with the hope that they could be solved in the 21st century. 2000 Clay Mathematics Institute 217. A $1 million prize will be awarded for solving each of these 7 problems. 7100. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06009. Take the choice of which kind of soup to buy. There's too much data here for you to struggle with: calories, price, salt content, taste, packaging, and so on. If you were a robot, you'd be stuck here all day trying to make a decision, with no obvious way to trade off which details matter more. To land on a choice, you need a summary of some sort. And that's what the feedback from your body is able to give you. Thinking about your budget might make your palms sweat, or your mouth might water thinking about the last time you consumed the chicken noodle soup, or noting the excessive creaminess of the other soup might give you a stomachache. You simulate your experience with one soup, and then the other. Your bodily experience helps your brain to quickly place a value on soup A, and another on soup B, allowing you to tip the balance in one direction or the other. A, B. You don't just extract the data from the soup cans, you feel the data. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06 number 10. In the 1930s, the work of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, began to be widely known and appreciated. 1930 Sigmund Freud. Less well known at the time was the fact that Freud had found out, almost by accident, how helpful his pet dog Jofi was to his patients. Freud Jofi. He had only become a dog lover in later life when Jofi was given to him by his daughter Anna. Freud Anna Jofi. The dog sat in on the doctor's therapy sessions, and Freud discovered that his patients felt much more comfortable talking about their problems if the dog was there. Freud. Some of them even preferred to talk to Jofi, rather than the doctor. Freud, Jofi. Freud noted that if the dog sat near the patient found it easier to relax, but if Jofi sat on the other side of the room, the patient seemed more tense and distressed. Freud, Jofi. He was surprised to realize that Jofi seemed to sense this too. Jofi. The dog's presence was an especially calming influence on child and teenage patients. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06 number 11. Do you have a tendency to focus more on what you don't have than on what you do? Unfortunately, many people tend to focus on what they don't have, when in reality they are sitting on a pile of blessings. Unrealistic expectations and comparisons to others lead to jealousy. Being envious of what others have only serves to make you unhappy with what you personally have. It's hard to be grateful when all you can think about is what you don't have or think you should get. Oftentimes frustration and dissatisfaction are actually the result of unrealistic expectations on our part. We think our situation should be this way or that way, or at least different from the way it is. Gratitude is not about expectations, but about being thankful for our situation no matter what our expectations may be. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 06 Number 12. Many parents do not understand why their teenagers occasionally behave in an irrational or dangerous way. At times, it seems like teens don't think things through or fully consider the consequences of their actions. Adolescents differ from adults in the way they behave, solve problems, and make decisions. There is a biological explanation for this difference. Studies have shown that brains continue to mature and develop throughout adolescence and well into early adulthood. Scientists have identified a specific region of the brain that is responsible for immediate reactions including fear and aggressive behavior. This region develops early. However, the frontal cortex, the area of the brain that controls reasoning and helps us think before we act, develops later. This part of the brain is still changing and maturing well into adulthood.